Daniel, for those very kind words. It is kind of a homecoming. I grew up just about an hour up the road in Overland Park, Kansas. It was ordained to the Diocese of Wichita, which we're in now. My mother lives just an hour up the road, and she'll be 90 years old on the 23rd of March. So I've been blessed with a great family. And yeah, give it back. Betty. And I want to thank Daniel and Patrick for the invitation to come and speak at this Prairie Troubadour, which I've heard about. This is the third annual one, but I've heard about it every year and always wanted to come, but never could manage to get my schedule clear to come. So I've really been looking forward to it. And it is a reunion because I see so many friends from different places in my life, and this is what it should be about. It should be about a reunion of friendship and faith. And I love the title, Family, Field and Family, Reflections on Human Ecology. And my talk is entitled Renewal of the Catholic Soul in an Age of Noise. And I just want to say that I've been talking a lot about it. I'm not the only one. A lot of people, Chris Check talked about it a little bit in his talk. I have this book here, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. The Power of Silence by Cardinal Sarah, which is a great book. If you haven't read it, pick it up. I'm sure Warren Farha, who is providing the books here, which I always say, the best bookstore on the planet in Wichita. Warren's been a good friend for many, many years. He's here. He's the owner of the bookstore, and he's here. That's how much he's interested in everyone here. But I've been speaking a lot about the age of noise, and it's important. And I think we all have to look deeply at our lives, as Chris Check mentioned, to look and see how we're living our lives, and how are we dealing with this age of noise in which we live. So, 25 years ago, a Norseman by the name of Erling Kagi skied alone to the South Pole. It took him 50 days. The temperature fell as low as negative 54 degrees. Erling Kagi is a successful lawyer. He owns a publishing company. He is a best-selling author, and he has a well-respected art collection. So Erling Kagi is not a lunatic. But before he began his journey, a journey that most of us would consider crazy, he took the batteries out of his radio, the only link he'd have to the world, as he traveled across a frozen continent. He threw them in the trash of the plane that took him to Antarctica. He wanted to make the journey in absolute silence and alone. In fact, he was the first person in history to reach the South Pole alone. Erling Kagi published a book in 2016 about his journey to the South Pole entitled Silence in the Age of Noise. Kagi wrote that as he skied, he realized something. He wrote that, quote, "The quieter I became, the more I heard." Last year, he told the New York Times that, quote, "It's easy to think silence is about turning your back on the world," he said. "For me, it's the opposite. It's opening up to the world, respecting more, and loving life." Kagi is not a believer, or at least he's not an outspoken one. He is. But he has discovered something important, I think. He has discovered the danger of the frenetic and terrifying age of noise. And he's discovered the extraordinary power of silence. The English satirist Aldous Huxley wrote in 1945, a long time ago really, that modernity is the age of noise. He coined that in 1945. And he was writing about the radio, whose noise, he said, quote, "penetrates the mind filling it with a babble of distractions, news items, mutually irrelevant bits of information, blasts of chorebantic or sentimental music, continually repeated doses of drama that bring no catharsis. End of quote. If Huxley had lived into the 21st century, he would have seen the age of noise doubled down and amplified beyond the radio. First to our televisions, then to our iPods, tablets, and mobile devices, machines which bring distraction and doses of drama with us wherever we go. We are today awash in information, assaulted often with tweets and pundits analyzing the latest crisis in Washington, or difficulties in the church, or serious social, and political, or environmental issues. It can become, for many people, overwhelming. To be sure, we have a responsibility as faithful Catholics to be aware of the world and its challenges, and to be engaged in the cultural and political affairs of our communities. We cannot shirk or opt out of this responsibility. But we are living at a moment of constant urgencies and crises, what some have called the tyranny of the immediate. No person can sustain the kind of noise, polemical, shrill, and reactive, which has become a substitute for conversation in contemporary culture. Nor should any person try. The age of noise diminishes virtue and charity and imagination, replacing them with anxiety and worry and exhaustion. Some praise, for example, the ability to multitask, when in reality, multitasking is simply the ability to do many things poorly in a mediocre way. We're made to concentrate and to focus on things in a singular way, to be attentive to persons and things in an intentional way with all of our senses. The Lord didn't make us for this kind of noise. He made us for conversation, for encounter, and for communion. But the Lord also made us for silence, for contemplation, for quietude and stillness. And without these things anchoring our lives and our hearts, the age of noise transforms us, fostering in our hearts reactive and uncharitable intemperance that characterizes the media, social media spaces which shape our culture. And the age of noise keeps grinding away at our souls. As believers, we are called to become a counter-witness to this age of noise. For the sake of our souls, of course, but also for the sake of the kingdom of God. People like Erling Hagee are starting to see the problems with the age of noise and asking what can be done, how it is possible to live differently. The answer to that question, like the answer to all questions that trouble the heart, is Jesus Christ. The church, the sacrament of salvation, knows the mystery of silence and its deepest object, communion with Jesus Christ. Tonight, I would like to offer 3 reflections on the age of noise and the ways in which we might be renewed and refreshed in our souls, so that we might find peace of soul in an age of frenetic and plaguing discontent. And I'd like to begin by talking about children. Many of you have probably heard of a new book entitled iGen by the psychologist Jean Twenge at the University of San Diego State. The full title of the book, and it's a long subtitle, but I have to read it because it's really telling. The full title of the book is iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. It's a long subtitle. But the book is about the impact of our technology on young people. And Dr. Twenge has studied generational differences as a psychologist for 25 years. In her research, she writes that around the year 2012, she noticed a dramatic shift in teen behaviors and emotional states. In fact, she says that the shift was unlike anything she had seen in her own work or in data about generational characteristics dating back to 1930. Those shifts, she says, denote an experience of life among young people radically different than people a few years older than her, than this generation, and radically different from anything recorded in all other data. 2012 was the year that the proportion of Americans who owned smartphones surpassed 50%. This fact, Dr. Twenge says, has completely shaped a generation. She calls them the iGeners, young people born between 1995 and 2012. I was preaching on this today because I had an all-school mass in Nebraska City at Lourdes Catholic School, K through 12. So I was speaking to a full church, about 800 kids who fit right into this generation, born after 1995. Young people growing up with smartphones and Instagrams, Snapchat, and internet available to them as far as they can remember. The oldest members of the iGeners were only 12 when the iPhone was introduced in 2007. They were 15 when iPads were introduced in 2010, and they were 9 when Facebook was launched, and 11 when Twitter came on the scene. These things have shaped their social patterns, their daily lives, and most interestingly, their neurological patterns in their brain. They live their lives on their phones. They report being more comfortable in their bedrooms than in a car with friends or at a party. They are less likely to drink or engage in premarital sex than their predecessors. They report being unattracted to the teenage values of yesteryear, to the independence and rebellion of James Dean, Grateful Dead. They are less likely to smoke or do drugs than our generation were. They even are less likely, far less likely, to get driver's licenses before they finish high school. But they are not happy, and they're not healthy. Dr. Twenge says that the rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. They report being lonely, depressed, and isolated. Erling Kagi, the Norseman, wrote his book on silence because he said his own daughters had grown up with iPhones practically attached to their bodies. They, quote, didn't know what silence was, he laments. They are living virtual lives. They are not experiencing real things. And Dr. Twenge says their virtual reality, the virtual reality of their day-to-day lives is what is making them unhappy. Here's what Dr. Twenge reports. 8th graders who spend 10 hours or more a week on social media are 56% more likely to say they're unhappy than those who devote less time to social media. Admittedly, 10 hours a week sounds like a lot, but those who spend 6 to 9 hours a week on social media are still 47% more likely to say they are unhappy than those who use social media even less. The opposite is true of in-person interactions. Those who spend an above-average amount of time with their friends in person are 20% less likely to say they're unhappy than those who hang out far below the average amount of time. Quote, all screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness, she says. And there's not a single exception. Our kids need real things. They need to experience the world. They need to experience sunshine and music and romance and mistakes. They need to experience friendship. And we have an obligation to give them those things. There are other issues. Today's young people believe in technocracy. They believe that the limits of what we are able to do determine the limits of our morality. They believe that science and faith are incompatible. They believe that religion is the cause of unhappiness, inequality, and violence in the world. These things aren't true. We know that. And we have an obligation to show them that. We have an obligation to show them through the experience of real things what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. To combat the frightening effect of the age of noise in young people, we need to do more than to take their phones away. We need to show them the real and enduring things that are utterly more attractive. Doing things like this weekend. Many of you know I'm a graduate of the Integrated Humanities program, as some of you are as well, at the University of Kansas. And when I began the program, I don't think I had ever read a book all the way through in my high school. I confess that, I know. I went to Shawnee Mission West High School, which is just about an hour away. The professors used to joke with us that IHP was a remedial program for students, like me, who had no experience, really, of the true and the good and the beautiful. But more than anything, the Integrated Humanities program was about the discovery of real things through the joy of literature and music and poetry, but also through the joy of learning to waltz, attending a formal waltz, complete with an orchestra, and asking young women to take a spot on our dance card, and through the joy of the outdoors, through stargazing, camping, and experiencing the agricultural rhythms that seem embedded in the soul of this part of the world, and which are at the very heart of St. Martin's Academy. Don't get the wrong idea. At the same time I was experiencing those things, I was also doing other things that most college students do. Playing badly in a rock band, going to bars and concerts. But the point is that I was blessed to discover these real things during those college years. Rocks are hard and water is wet, Dr. Renewal used to say. The iGen generation is depressed because it's missing reality, because it is lying in bed instead of being out on the prairie with us. And so we'll renew our souls and the souls of a generation in desperate need of help if we undertake the painstaking work of extracting them from their devices and allowing them to experience reality. At this conference, people like Chris Check, Joseph Pierce, William Fahey, John Pedeback, and others, people who know the drama of reality and are living this way, can help us to discover these ways. A generation is becoming lost to the joy and wonder of this drama. And each one of us is called to help them experience the joy of the true and the good and the beautiful, in the experience of the real, concrete, lived experiences of stories and songs and poems, and waltzing, and yes, even rock bands if they're good. Among the good sorely needed by iGeners, and this is my second point, is friendship, true friendship. This May, Catholic author Rebecca Fretch will release a new book called Can We Be Friends? It's about the crisis of loneliness that many of us are experiencing. I'm looking forward to the book because it talks about a reality that I've observed in my own pastoral ministry as a bishop, that we don't know how to become friends with one another. A few weeks ago, I had the chance of spending a few days with my oldest friend, Archbishop Paul Coakley, who was also in the Integrated Humanities program, and my roommate all through college. I thought about the power of the friendship I've experienced in my life. My friends have witnessed to the power of God in their own lives and given me a living experience of the Catholic faith and of our Catholic culture. By means of direct impressions of the faith of my friends, the Lord has touched my own heart countless times. Friendship has the power to do that. Christian friendship has the power to awaken our hearts and minds to the living presence of Jesus Christ. Friendship is an extraordinary human good, and in truth, a supernatural good as well. It might be helpful to make this more clear, to consider what friendship actually is about. It seems to me that we have a very thin and hollow notion of friendship these days. The great British writer C.S. Lewis says that friends, true friends, quote, stand side by side, their eyes looking ahead, together. Lewis says that, quote, friendship must be about something, because friends are travelers on the same quest. Friends, he says, have all a common vision. Lewis says that friendship begins with fundamental questions. Do you see the same truth? Do you care about the same truth? Do you see the world as I do? When Jesus Christ invites us to friendship, he invites us to be travelers on a quest with him, to share in the mission of the Incarnation, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. Christ invites us to friendship by inviting us to share in his mission. That mission is the salvation of the world. My spiritual patron and huge influence on my conversion, Blessed John Henry Newman, said that friendship is a school of love, a school of Christian charity. He thought that human friendship teaches us in a particular way how to exercise universal charity. Newman wrote that, quote, the best preparation for loving the world at large and loving it duly and wisely is to cultivate an intimate friendship and affection towards those who are immediately about us, those who are closest to us. Friendship is a school of Christian charity because friendship makes demands upon us. Our friends are those who are most close to us, who share a vision and a mission. Our friends are collaborators in the great work, the magnus opus of our lives. But our friends, like us, are human beings. And relationships with human beings require forgiveness, forbearance, patience, and understanding. We learn those virtues by loving our friends. Newman says, in another great quote from Newman, the real love of man must depend on practice, and therefore must begin by exercising itself on our friends around us. Otherwise, it will have no existence. By trying to love our relations and friends, by submitting to their wishes, though contrary to our own, by bearing with their infirmities, by overcoming their occasional waywardness by kindness, by dwelling on their excellences and trying to copy them, thus it is that we form in our hearts that root of charity, which, though small at first, may, like the mustard seed, at last even overshadow the earth. End of quote. Friendship, true friendship, turns us away from the age of noise and turns us towards something deeper. Friendship turns us toward love of one another and love of God. Friendship restores the sanity that the age of noise challenges, combats the isolation, the fear of missing out, the self-doubt and loneliness of our present age of noise. Friendship offers us something rich in an age of thin gruel. Friendship is real, and reality is deeply satisfying. Finally, my last point, I want to talk about prayer in this age of noise. And this is where I would like to return to that theme of silence. Here I will be drawing upon my pastoral letter on Eucharistic adoration, which I released last Easter. So if you've read it, well, I beg your patience, because this will be familiar to you. But I hope it's worth hearing again, because I really do think Eucharistic adoration is the key. Because it's one of the last places where we can be reasonably certain that will not be disturbed. God's first language, said St. John of the Cross, is silence. In the silence of Eucharistic adoration, we learn true humility. As we kneel before our Creator God, we are confronted with the power and the mystery of God's love, love made visible. And it is from the silence and humility that we experience before the Holy Eucharist a deep communion and friendship with God. He speaks to our heart. Heart speaks to heart. Cardinal Robert Serra says in his book that silence is an attitude of the soul, and that when we adore the Lord in silence, His presence fills our hearts, our minds, and our imaginations. Just as an aside, this last week we had Catholic Schools Week, and we had 3 different Eucharistic processions through our high schools, and we had all of the high school students kneeling in front of their locker, and I would process with the Blessed Sacrament up and down the hallways of the school and into the classrooms and around, and finally into the church. And it was remarkable how silent everyone was in the presence of the Lord. In silence, kneeling before Jesus, we learn how God speaks to us. We learn to hear His still, small voice, and we learn to speak to God from the depths of our own hearts. In silence, we learn to put aside the plaguing distractions of our time, the chirping and buzzing of our technology, and simply experience the presence of God with transforming peace. God speaks to us when He's present before us in the Holy Eucharist. We need only to learn His language. We need only to dare to kneel humbly before the Lord, and with trust in God, begin a dialogue of silence, intimate, powerful, and real. Cardinal Robert Serra says that, quote, "The true revolution comes from silence and leads us towards God and toward others so that we can place ourselves humbly at their service." Renewing our souls in the age of noise begins in silence before the Lord. We often resist that because it's difficult, it's hard to be quiet. We often look for programs or itineraries or distractions because silence is daunting. In 1654, the scientist and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote, quote, all humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I think that bears repeating. All humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. But becoming holy requires that we abandon the pleasures of our culture, our distraction, and our comforts from these habits. Becoming holy requires we enter in the most mysterious places we can fathom, the mystery of silence, in which we are alone with ourselves and with the Lord. The Lord is waiting to transform us in the deep and intimate friendship of holiness. And this can be terrifying. And yet there is nothing more satisfying, because there's nothing more satisfying than the love of Jesus Christ. Once again, Cardinal Serra says in his book that it takes courage to free oneself from everything that weighs down our life, because we love nothing more than appearances, ease, and husks of things. Carried away toward the exterior by his need to say everything, the garrulous man cannot help but being far from God, incapable of any profound spiritual activity. In contrast, the silent man is a free man. The world's chains have no hold on him. End of quote. We discover the love of God and transmit it to the world when we learn the language of the Word and the mystery of silence. Pope St. John Paul II says that modern man can know the Lord and is thus able to proclaim Him above all by letting himself be educated in adoring silence. Because at the summit, he goes on to say, at the summit of the knowledge and experience of God, there is His absolute transcendence. In conclusion, brothers and sisters, the age of noise presents new challenges to our lives as Christians. We cannot run from them. We cannot eschew technology or become Luddites, totally removed from the world. You know, when I talk about technology, it sounds like, I mean, I've got social media, crazy, Twitter account, all this, and it's very effective. But we have to manage our technology or it will manage us. It's powerful. So we cannot eschew technology. This is not responsible, and it's not the vocation of a Christian. This is not what missionary discipleship is all about. But the solutions to our challenges are startlingly simple and very ancient. We're called to form young people in reality, helping them to discover the true and the good and the beautiful in real things. We're called to form meaningful friendships with one another as fellow travelers on a quest. And we're called to begin all things on our knees in prayerful silence before Almighty God. If we can keep those things in mind, the Lord will renew and restore us and refresh our souls and make us whole and make us a witness to a peace surpassing understanding amidst the chaos of this age of noise. Thank you very much for your patience.